The empty desk. Elijah Westbrook straightened his tie for the third time that morning, his reflection in the elevator's polished doors showing the same composed expression he'd perfected over 15 years at Westbrook Literary Agency. The agency, built from nothing after college, represented some of New York's most promising authors. Today was Tuesday, which meant manuscript reviews until noon, lunch at Marcello's, grilled salmon, no sauce, and calls to publishers until 5. Everything in its place, everything on schedule. Except when he stepped into his office, Rebecca's desk, meticulous as always, was missing one critical element: Rebecca herself. "Mr. Westbrook?" A tentative voice came from behind him. He turned to find Margot from HR clutching a folder to her chest. "I need to speak with you about Rebecca." 10 minutes later, Elijah sat at his desk, staring at Rebecca's resignation letter. After 5 years as his executive assistant, she had accepted a position across the country, effective immediately. No notice, no proper transition. Nothing but a neatly typed letter explaining that family circumstances required her immediate relocation to Seattle. "We've found a temporary replacement," Margot had explained. "She starts today. Excellent references, though her background is unconventional." Unconventional. Elijah despised the word. At precisely 9:17 a.m., a soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, not looking up from Rebecca's letter. "Good morning. I'm Zoe Chen, your new assistant. Well, temporary assistant. Though I'm hoping to make a good impression, so maybe not so temporary." Elijah looked up, momentarily startled by the rapid stream of words. The woman standing in his doorway couldn't have been more different from Rebecca's tailored suits and subtle presence. Zoe Chen wore a deep blue dress with a vintage-looking cardigan, her black hair pulled into a messy bun secured by what appeared to be a pencil. Her smile was immediate and warm. "Miss Chen," he said, standing, "I understand you're filling in for Rebecca. Just Zoe, please. And yes, though I gather her departure was unexpected. I'm sorry. Transitions can be difficult." Elijah gestured to Rebecca's, now Zoe's, desk. "Your references are impressive, though Margot mentioned your background is somewhat different." Zoe settled into the chair, immediately adjusting its height. "I was a travel writer for 6 years. Lived out of a backpack, wrote for magazines and guidebooks. But after my father's heart attack last year, I decided to stay in New York more permanently." She glanced around the pristine office. "This is quite different from writing in beach huts and hostels." "Indeed." Elijah handed her a thick binder. "This contains all of our protocols. Rebecca ran this office with precision." "I expect the same." "Of course." Zoe accepted the binder with a nod. "Though I should warn you, I believe organization serves creativity, not the other way around." Elijah frowned slightly. "At Westbrook Literary, Miss Chen, we believe in both." "Zoe," she corrected gently, "and I'm looking forward to learning your systems." She picked up a small ceramic figurine from her bag, a blue elephant, and placed it beside the computer. "My lucky charm," she explained. "It's traveled to 32 countries with me." Elijah opened his mouth to object to the personal item, then closed it. "Temporary," he reminded himself. "Just until HR found someone proper. The Donovan manuscript needs to be reviewed by Thursday," he said instead. "And I have calls beginning at 10. I take my coffee. Black, no sugar, in the white mug with the quote from Hemingway," Zoe finished, surprising him. "Margot briefed me. And your lunch order at Marcello's is already confirmed for 12:30. For the first time that morning, Elijah felt a flicker of optimism. Perhaps this unexpected change wouldn't be the disaster he feared, until Zoe added with a bright smile, "Though I took the liberty of adding a side of their tiramisu. The review in my last article called it life-changing, and everyone deserves something sweet on a Tuesday." Elijah Westbrook never ordered dessert with lunch, never. This was going to be a very long temporary assignment. Misaligned pages. 3 weeks into Zoe's temporary assignment, Elijah found himself standing at her desk, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You reorganized the filing system," he stated flatly. Zoe glanced up from her computer, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I did. It's more intuitive now, color-coded by genre instead of alphabetical." The romance manuscripts have pink tabs, mysteries are blue, literary fiction is purple. The system we had worked perfectly for 5 years, Elijah interrupted. I need to find the Harrington submission immediately. The editor at Penguin is waiting. Second drawer, blue section, right side, Zoe replied without hesitation. I can find anything in 3 seconds flat now. Elijah located the manuscript exactly where she'd indicated, but his frown remained. In the future, Ms. Chen, Zoe, she corrected automatically. Please consult me before making changes to established protocols. She nodded, but her eyes sparkled with something that looked suspiciously like amusement. Of course, though I should mention that Miranda from accounting stopped by earlier and said she loved the new system. Apparently, Rebecca had been suggesting something similar for months. Before Elijah could respond, his phone rang. He retreated to his office, manuscript in hand, irritation simmering beneath his composed exterior. Later that afternoon, disaster struck. Elijah was meeting with a promising debut novelist when Zoe burst into the conference room, her usual composure noticeably absent. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but there's an emergency with the Sophia Laurent manuscript. 10 minutes later, they stood in Elijah's office as he stared at his computer in disbelief. The final edited version of their most high-profile author's manuscript, due to the publisher tomorrow, had been replaced with an earlier draft when Zoe had attempted to back up the files. This is precisely why we follow procedures, Elijah said, his voice dangerously quiet. Ms. Laurent is our biggest client. If we miss this deadline, I know, Zoe said, her hands twisting together. But I think I can fix this. She pulled out her phone. Remember when you had me email the last version to our copy editor last week? I sent it from my personal email because the attachment was too large for the company server. She scrolled through her sent messages, then looked up with a triumphant smile. It's still here. I can forward it back to you right now. Relief washed over Elijah, though he maintained his stern expression. That solves the immediate problem, but it doesn't change the fact that... His office door flew open as Margot from HR rushed in. Elijah, Sophia Laurent's publicist just called. Sophia wants to cancel her book tour completely. Says she's having second thoughts about the whole project. Elijah felt the blood drain from his face. Laurent's psychological thriller was projected to be their biggest release of the year. Get her on the phone, he said to Zoe. I need to... Actually, Zoe interrupted, I don't think that's the right approach. Elijah and Margot both stared at her. I read an interview with her last year in Literary Traveler, Zoe continued. She mentioned how her best ideas come when she's cooking. She studied at Le Cordon Bleu before becoming a writer. Zoe glanced at her watch. It's 4:30 now. What if, instead of calling, we go to her apartment with ingredients for coq au vin, her favorite according to the article, and talk through her concerns while cooking? That's completely unprofessional, Elijah began, but Margot cut him off. It's brilliant. Conventional approaches haven't been working with her anyway. 2 hours later, in Sophia Laurent's elegant kitchen, Elijah watched in astonishment as Zoe and the famously difficult author laughed together while chopping vegetables. By the time they sat down to eat, Laurent had not only recommitted to the book tour, but had suggested adding 3 more cities. As they walked back to the office to retrieve their things, the city lights illuminating the damp streets after an evening shower, Elijah cleared his throat. Your approach with Laurent was unorthodox but effective. Zoe smiled up at him. Sometimes the best solutions come from coloring outside the lines a little. For just a moment, with her face lit by the golden glow of streetlights and her eyes bright with triumph, Elijah felt something shift in his carefully ordered world. The filing system can stay, he said abruptly. But please, no more surprises with the manuscripts. Her laugh echoed in the quiet street. I'll do my best, but I can't make any promises. Neither of them mentioned how his hand had briefly touched the small of her back as they crossed the busy intersection, or how neither had pulled away. Margin notes. You've been avoiding your sister's calls for 2 weeks, Zoe said, setting a cup of coffee on Elijah's desk one Tuesday morning. 6 weeks into her temporary position, she'd somehow transitioned from Ms. Chen to Zoe in Elijah's carefully compartmentalized mind. He looked up from his computer with a frown. I wasn't aware you were monitoring my personal calls. I'm not. But Audrey has called 4 times this week, and you've asked me to tell her you're in meetings each time. Zoe perched on the edge of his desk, a liberty Rebecca would never have taken. She mentioned something about an art exhibition opening this Friday. Elijah sighed. My sister and I have complicated history. Most siblings do. Zoe sipped her own tea. My brother once sold my favorite doll to buy baseball cards. I didn't speak to him for a year. Despite himself, Elijah smiled. Slightly different circumstances. Of course, but she sounded hopeful that you'd come. Zoe placed an elegant invitation beside his coffee. She dropped this off yesterday when you were at lunch. Said it was her first solo exhibition in 5 years. Elijah picked up the invitation, tracing the embossed letters with his fingertip. Audrey Westbrook, liminal spaces. He hadn't attended one of her exhibitions since their parents' accident 3 years ago. I have the Baxter contract review on Friday evening, he said finally. Rescheduled for Monday, Zoe replied promptly. Mr. Baxter had a conflict. Elijah raised an eyebrow. Convenient timing. Zoe's expression remained innocent. Completely coincidental. But since your evening is now free. That Friday night, Elijah found himself standing in a crowded gallery in Chelsea, uncomfortable in a setting that had once been as familiar as his own office. Audrey's work had evolved, large abstract canvases exploring themes of absence and connection. He stood before a particularly striking piece, blue and gray shapes separated by a jagged line of gold. It's called The Space Between Words, a voice said beside him. He turned to find Zoe, looking entirely different from her office self in a deep green dress, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. You're here, he said, surprise evident in his voice. Audrey invited the whole office, she smiled, though I suspect she was hoping most for you. Before he could respond, Audrey herself appeared, her resemblance to Elijah striking in the gallery lights, the same dark eyes and reserved expression. You came, she said simply. The siblings regarded each other for a moment, 3 years of silence hanging between them. Your work is beautiful, Elijah finally said. This one especially. He gestured to the canvas before them. It's about the things we don't say, Audrey replied, and how they shape the space between us. Elijah felt Zoe quietly slip away, giving them privacy. An hour later, after difficult but necessary conversation with his sister, he found Zoe by the gallery's small bar, chatting with the bartender. Thank you, he said quietly when they were alone, for pushing me to come tonight. Zoe shrugged. Everyone needs a little push sometimes. Later, as they shared a taxi uptown, her apartment apparently only a few blocks from his, Elijah found himself studying her profile in the flashing city lights. You never mentioned that your background includes art history, he said. She turned to him with surprise. You looked me up? I was curious about your references. After 6 weeks? Her smile was knowing. Getting a bit late for a background check, isn't it? The taxi stopped at her building, a pre-war brownstone with window boxes still blooming despite the autumn chill. Would you like to come up for coffee? She asked suddenly. Or tea? I have that jasmine blend you pretend not to like but always steal sips of from my cup. The invitation hung in the air between them. Crossing this threshold would mean acknowledging that whatever was happening between them had moved beyond professional boundaries. Yes, he said simply. I'd like that. In her small apartment, filled with books and artifacts from her travels, they spoke of everything but work. Of his childhood sailing with his father, of her year living in a village in Thailand, of favorite authors and secret dreams. When their hands touched reaching for the same book on her shelf, neither pulled away. And when he finally kissed her, tentatively at first and then with growing certainty, it felt like the beginning of a story neither had planned to write. Between the lines. I can't believe you convinced me to attend this, Elijah muttered as he maneuvered his car along the winding road to Oak Ridge Writers' Retreat, 3 hours north of the city. Rain streaked the windows, creating a cozy cocoon inside the vehicle. The Loire Valley Literary Festival sends 3 representatives every year, Zoe reminded him from the passenger seat. As their new American partner, Westbrook Literary should make an appearance. Besides, you were the one who said we needed to secure Madeline Foster for the agency, and she only takes meetings at retreats like this. Elijah smiled slightly, using my own words against me. You've been paying attention. Always. Her voice softened, and he glanced over to find her watching him, her expression warm. 2 months had passed since that first kiss in her apartment. 2 months of carefully maintained professionalism at the office, with only Miranda from accounting raising an eyebrow when she noticed them arriving together one morning after a late night of reviewing manuscripts had turned into breakfast. The retreat center appeared through the rain, a sprawling Victorian mansion surrounded by maple trees, showing the first hints of autumn gold. As they checked in, the retreat director greeted them effusively. Mr. Westbrook, Miss Chen! We're honored to have Westbrook Literary joining us this year. We've placed you in the Hemingway and Fitzgerald cabins just down the path from the main house. Elijah caught Zoe's eye, a silent question passing between them. They had been careful, professional. This retreat, marking the first time they'd acknowledged their relationship, might extend beyond stolen evenings and weekend mornings. Actually, Zoe said smoothly, we were hoping to save you the extra cabin. Environmental considerations and all that. The director smiled knowingly. Of course. The Hemingway cabin has a lovely view of the lake. Later, after a welcome reception where Elijah had made significant progress with Madeline Foster, they retreated to their cabin through the persistent drizzle. Inside, a fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting golden light across the rustic but elegant space. You were brilliant with Madeline, Zoe said, slipping off her rain-dampened cardigan. The way you talked about her narrative structure, she was completely captivated. Elijah stepped closer, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I had a good teacher, someone who reminded me that connecting with authors is about more than sales projections. Her smile was soft as she leaned into his touch. Careful, Mr. Westbrook. People might start to think you've gone soft. Perhaps I have. His voice was quiet, almost vulnerable. You've changed things, Zoe. The way I work, the way I see things, the way I feel. The admission hung in the air between them, more significant than any words they'd shared before. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the cabin roof. Dance with me, she said suddenly. There's no music. We don't need any. She took his hand, guiding it to her waist. They swayed slowly before the fire, the rain providing rhythm, bodies drawing closer with each movement. When his lips found hers, the last walls between them finally crumbled. Hours later, tangled in sheets with the rain still falling outside, Elijah traced patterns on her bare shoulder. I never expected this, he confessed. You were supposed to be temporary. Zoe propped herself up on one elbow, her hair falling in a dark curtain around them. And now? Before he could answer, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Elijah reached for it, frowning at the screen. It's Rebecca, he said, surprise evident in his voice. My former assistant. Zoe sat up, drawing the sheet around herself. At 11 at night? Elijah scanned the message, his expression growing complicated. She's moving back to New York, the Seattle position. Didn't work out. He looked up, meeting Zoe's eyes. She's asking if her job is still available. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Rebecca's return would mean Zoe's position, temporary from the beginning, would end. The careful balance they'd created would dissolve. What will you tell her? Zoe asked, her voice carefully neutral. Elijah set the phone down without responding. I don't know, he admitted. Rebecca was excellent at her job. Methodical, precise. We worked well together for years. I see. Zoe's voice was quiet as she slipped from the bed, pulling on his discarded shirt. She moved to the window, watching the rain illuminate the lake in brief silver flashes. But she was never more than my assistant, he continued, following her to the window. She never challenged me, never made me see beyond spreadsheets and contracts. He turned her gently to face him. She never made me drive 3 hours in the rain to a literary retreat I'd normally avoid like the plague. Zoe's smile was tentative. Is that a good thing? It's everything. His hands framed her face. I don't want to go back to who I was before you arrived. I don't want to go back to seeing the world in black and white. The rain slowed as they stood together by the window, the future unwritten but suddenly full of possibility. The final chapter. The evening of the Westbrook Literary Agency's annual autumn gala arrived with perfect September weather. The terrace of the Bowery Hotel aglow with string lights and the soft murmur of New York's literary elite. Elijah adjusted his tie, surveying the scene with quiet satisfaction. Their newest acquisition, Madeline Foster's highly anticipated novel, had sparked a bidding war between publishers, culminating in the agency's biggest deal of the year. Everything looks perfect, Miranda from accounting said, appearing at his side with a champagne flute, though I never thought I'd see balloons at a Westbrook event. Elijah followed her gaze to where elegant silver and blue balloons floated above the bar. Zoe insisted they add a sense of festivity. I've learned to trust her instincts, Miranda smiled knowingly. Speaking of Zoe, have you told her yet? Tonight, he confirmed, his hand instinctively touching the small box in his jacket pocket. 3 months had passed since Rebecca's message at the retreat. 3 months of navigating the complications of loving someone who also worked for him. Tonight would change everything. Mr. Westbrook? A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. Elijah turned to find Rebecca Winters standing before him. Elegant as ever in a tailored gray suit, her blonde hair pulled into its customary sleek chignon. Rebecca, he said, surprised despite knowing she'd been invited. How are you finding Seattle? Actually, that's what I wanted to discuss. She glanced around, then lowered her voice. Seattle was a mistake. The publishing scene there is limited, and frankly, I miss New York. She straightened, professional as always. I'm moving back next month, and I was hoping we could discuss my returning to my position. Elijah's response was interrupted by a commotion near the entrance. Sophia Laurent had arrived, dramatically late as usual, with Zoe at her side. The author was laughing, a rare sight, as Zoe gestured animatedly, likely recounting one of her travel stories. Excuse me, he said to Rebecca, his eyes never leaving Zoe, radiant in a midnight blue dress. There's something I need to do. As he crossed the terrace, time seemed to slow. He remembered the first day Zoe had arrived, the chaos she'd initially brought to his ordered existence, the color she'd gradually added to his monochrome world. How fitting that the woman who'd changed everything had started as a temporary replacement. Elijah, Sophia exclaimed as he approached. Your assistant has been telling me about the literary festival you're planning in collaboration with the Loire Valley event. Brilliant idea. All Zoe's, actually, he replied, his eyes meeting hers. She's not my assistant anymore, though. Both women looked at him in surprise. As of today, Zoe Chen is Westbrook Literary's new Director of International Relations, he continued. She'll be heading our expanded Foreign Rights Department and managing our new partnership with the Loire Valley Festival. Zoe's eyes widened. But you never mentioned... I wanted it to be a surprise. He turned to Sophia. Would you excuse us for a moment? When they were alone by the terrace railing, the city lights spreading below them like fallen stars, Elijah took her hands in his. You're serious about the promotion? Zoe asked, still looking stunned. Absolutely. You've transformed how we connect with authors, how we think about storytelling. The agency needs your vision. He paused. And I've realized I need something too. What's that? A partner. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing the small blue box. In every sense of the word. Her breath caught as he opened it to reveal a vintage emerald ring, the deep green stone reminiscent of the dress she'd worn the night they'd first crossed the line between professional and personal. I saw Rebecca is here, she said softly. Yes, she wants her old position back. And what did you tell her? That her position no longer exists. He slipped the ring onto her finger. The Westbrook Agency has evolved. So have I. Zoe's eyes glistened in the soft light. Are you sure? Your life was perfectly ordered before I arrived. And perfectly empty, he countered. You taught me that sometimes the most beautiful stories come from unplanned chapters. He drew her closer. I don't want to go back to color-coded filing systems and predictable endings. I want this, us, messiness and all. Her answer was in her kiss. Witnessed by the glittering New York skyline and a terrace full of storytellers who would later claim the moment was straight out of the most perfect romance novel. 6 months later, on a rainy spring afternoon, Elijah Westbrook and Zoe Chen were married in the courtyard of the New York Public Library, surrounded by books and possibility. Their vows, written on the margins of their favorite novels, promised a life of unexpected adventures and stories yet to be told. Rebecca Winters, now heading her own literary consulting firm, sent a congratulatory arrangement of perfectly arranged white roses. Zoe placed them beside her desk at the agency, right next to her blue elephant figurine and a framed photo of a rain-soaked literary retreat where two people who never should have fit together discovered they were, in fact, each other's perfect story. And in their home, a brownstone with window boxes and overflowing bookshelves, the manuscript of their life together continued to be written, one surprising chapter after another, with plenty of margin notes and no final page in sight.